Today, I'm super excited to have Benjie De La Peña kick us off in a conversation around trust and power and data sharing. Benjie is the CEO of the Shared Use Mobility Center in Chicago. He chairs the Global Network for Popular Transportation. He also convenes the Shared Mobility 2030 Action Agenda and served on the board of the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. And he earned his master's in urban planning from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University and his BA in communication from University of Philippines College of Mass Communication. I am so excited to introduce you to Benjie De La Peña. Thank you.
Good morning. How's everybody? Yeah, gorgeous day in Seattle. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I also used to work for the Seattle Department of Transportation as Chief of Strategy and Innovation. That was in 2019, pre-pandemic days. And when I was here, I served a total, it was 3 years, I served a total of 4 mayors and 5 directors of transportation. So one of the things you have to assume in government is things change and people change and priorities change. So Anat asked me to talk about power and inclusion, which when we talk about open data, it's always like, so it can be more inclusive. And so I came up with this. I am very happy with this title. I think it's witty. But I'm patting myself on the back. But so we'll do a random walk. In other words, I'll just be telling you stories. This is not a keynote where I'm going to make a major point. I'll tell you some stories, and then what I want to do at the end is that let's have some interaction and ask me questions, right? I also don't like this cover slide because I think it doesn't have character, right? So let's do this, right? For those who are visually impaired, the slide is a dragon and a tigress from who's like a kung fu artist, and they're fighting. So crunching data and hiding power. Okay, I'm from the Shared Use Mobility Center. Our mission is to connect and empower change leaders who are building the mobility systems that will fight climate change or are fighting climate change, advancing equity and strengthening communities. And our vision is a future where everyone, regardless of your race, ability, gender, you have access to affordable, dignified, joyful transportation and reliable transportation, right? Even if you don't own a car. One of the things, and this is the last time we were together, was we had our what we call a new summit. So we've been around 12 or so years, 13 years, and we were one of the first conferences to look at technology and transportation. When we started in 2013, or when they started, I wasn't there yet, there was Zipcar, 3 cities with bike share, New York, DC, and a city in Kentucky. I think it was Lexington or Louisville. I should check, right? And then 2 new companies, one called Zimride and another one called Uber. Zimride, it became Lyft. So 10 years later, we looked at our conference and said, we looked around and there were 23 other conferences around transportation and technology, including some very, very big ones. And we really asked, what's the value we bring here, right? And we went beyond the whole solutionism, which tends to happen in these conferences, meaning you show up, some very smart person is up there talking about some technology solution, and you get a little inspired, you go back and you're trying to figure out, how do I do this, right, with the people who didn't get to go to the conference? And what we decided was, well, we didn't decide, but when we analyzed it, we said, this systemic view of finding the magic button leverage point in transportation, and we've been doing that for ages. Like, if we change federal transportation policy, everything will be good, and it doesn't happen. We realize that it's people who change systems. There are lots of solutions, but it's people who change systems. So our conference was very much focused on, let's build the networks locally build networks of trust, and move this forward. All right. I'll show this slide. This is my main 3 points. You don't have to listen to the rest if you want to. So open up power, not just data. Tell stories to change systems. We have, particularly if you're very well educated and a little more progressive, we tend to assume data and logic will make the case, right? And we know that doesn't happen. It actually does not happen. And lastly, you relate, don't correlate. Right? So you've gotten all my points from my talk, so you can go now. Well, maybe four pieces or readings that I would strongly recommend. Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott. This piece of research by Susan Lee Starr, The Ethnography of Infrastructure. Then Local Power in the Age of Policing by Kevin Webb. It's an essay on the web. And then Information, A History, A Theory of Flood, a book by James P. Gleek. Now you are armed with all the knowledge that I have synthesized. All right, let's go to stories. The visual is a forest. You can see the floor of the forest, and there are trees, right? So this is the story of German agroforestry in the 1800s or 1700s. So being scientific was all the rage in Europe, of course, after the Enlightenment. And the German states were, of course, into agroforestry. And they wanted to be systematic, right? And so what they decided to do was, it's inefficient to go into the forest, and there's not enough space to cut the wood and all of that. So they started planting trees in rows, right? Which was, they have enough space. And then they took out all the undergrowth. Right? The result was, in the first 2 or 3 years, harvest yields went up. But then the soil started dying. Why was that? Because the undergrowth was important. Even more so now, we know that mycelium, the trees actually communicate and share resources, right? So this kind of narrow, this is the only thing we're measuring, and therefore the logic is we will connect to that and operate according to what we're trying to measure. That was the lesson. That's from James C. Scott. Okay, next story. This is Eddie Murphy. Those of you who are born in this century may not know the reference. This is from Coming to America. And those of you who are my Gen Xers, what were they trying to get in Coming to America? What was the thing they were trying to steal? I'm disappointed in my Gen Xers. They were trying to get the report of frozen orange juice commodities futures.
That's trading places.
Oh, you're right. I am completely wrong. There you go. Okay. Thank you for correcting me. That was Trading Places. There you go. So Eddie Murphy, I'm the one who's in trouble. But the idea was having information gives you power, which is true. If you look at trading and stocks, there's this whole line of technology from the telegraph, the telegraph was around before electricity with the semaphore flags, right? And then the ticker tape, and then weather projections from other places where it used to take you days to ride that by a horse. And now the kind of very rapid microsecond trading that's going on, because access to information is access to power and wealth. Right? So it's never neutral, and interests are never neutral. Let me pull out a bit. This is a painting called American Progress by John Gast. It was painted in 1872. He painted this because in 1845, John O'Donnell wrote an editorial where he coined the term manifest destiny. And it was to argue for a westward expansion of the United States. And this became their kind of emblem for it. If you've been paying attention to social media, I've been using this slide for 5 years or so now. Paying attention to social media, this has been used by the DHS recently. But let me point you to a few things about this. So the woman who is floating above the whole landscape, who is, of course, flimsily dressed, has the Star of Empire on her forehead, right? And she holds a book called Knowledge. Right? And as she moves forward, she's holding on her other hand a power line or a telegraph line. And if you follow it, there are telegraph poles and a train coming after, right? And then all of the indigenous people are scared and running back, right, away from it. So there is this narrative that's deeply embedded in settler colonialism that we have the technology, and that's why we should take control, right? It's like the AI conversation now, right? We should take control because we have all of this, right? So it's deeply embedded in the optimism because it ignores what's actually on the ground and says, this is better technology, you're going to go up to progress, and all of that kind of thing. Yeah. Next story. This is an old one too. This was a famous data visualization from Wired in the early 2000s. This was the dawn of data visualization with big data. And they basically mapped all the 311 calls in New York City and mapped it over a year. There are 1 million calls in this thing. Looks lovely. And they take it to the council and they say, here's where the problem areas are. What this obscures, though, was if you looked at the map of where these calls came from, you would think that Lower Manhattan had the most problems in all of New York City, right? And the areas with immigrants and where English was a second language, they had no problems. Why was that? Because the middle-class rich of Lower Manhattan tended to make more phone calls. Right? So the size of the data obscures where did that data come from and who's reporting, right? And it masks power. Okay, this is from an open data advocate who shall not be named. Again, this was in the last decade, who said basically, you know, we can get the governments to open up data. Just go over there, bring them cookies, right? And it's like, if you've ever worked in government, the myth that there is a single database of stuff and every record there is true is out the window, right? I used to work for Seattle Department of Transportation, as I said, so what I'm going to say is dated. They may have changed now. But among the things that we struggled with was the geo database of the city, which for some reason it was the Department of Budget that owned it, right? It was under control. It was not constructed with lat-long orientation, coordinates. It was 0 point with feet, which meant that our map actually didn't match with the map of the county. Right? Other thing was, it was the database of record. So you couldn't batch upload data. We had one person uploading every single piece of new thing on the roadway. So if you imagine you're doing a mile of University Way and there may be 5,000 items that you've just installed, guess how long it takes before it's updated into the record, right? And so, at least this was back in my time, the rough estimates were there were something like 50,000 or maybe 150,000 items on the roadway that were not on the record. Right? Because this assumption that if there's a single database and it's all well kept really falls out the window. Okay. Another story, resource and refresh rates. So this is a shearing diagram or pace layering diagram that Steward Brand made famous. And we adapted it for the Information Infrastructure Plan, the draft Information Infrastructure Plan for SDOT that we released in 2019 as a draft, but the mayor wasn't interested in it, so it was never propagated. But the whole argument we had was, if technology is so important, why don't we have a plan for it? Because in most departments, right, the technology side is treated as IT. So therefore, it's business case and business use, right? And one of the things you have to think about is as you get information, there's information that's very current and very new. You need that up to date. Right? And that would be emergencies, right? Or road closures and so on and so forth. And there's information that is much slower, and the slower the information is, the more powerful it is. Right? So in this, you have physical infrastructure, right, which changes much less slowly, and then all the way to governance. Who's at the table? Okay, so you have to think about the data refresh rate. As an example of that, we had this, the new mobility team, like all other DOTs at the time, were battling it out with the bike share companies, asking for real-time bike data. And maybe I'm the Luddite in the room, but I'm Luddite in the best sense of the word yet, and I was a little skeptical. The reason was there was really no real-time application of the data. It's not like if we knew that there was a bike that was parked the wrong way, we could dispatch a team, and in 5 minutes they would be there. Right? At best, we needed data for planning. And the argument of the plan was that, if you need data for planning, what you need is flows. You don't need the actual paths. And particularly in this age of ICE, we were like, that's too much private data. At that time, again, it's a little different now maybe. We had 450 vehicle counters on the road. Guess how many bike counters we had? Close, 12, right? 12, right? So, when you get a volume of data, and I assure you in any city in the US, the largest store of data, the largest by far, is vehicular data. Traffic movements, average daily traffic. A few more stories. I think I've got, okay. This is a story about Slum Dwellers International. Strongly recommend this group. You can visit them. They're in 33 countries. They emerged from people who lived in informal settlements, who understood that they had power to bring to the table. And I live by their saying, which is, they say the first act of inclusion is to be counted. When I worked with them a long time ago, I was in philanthropy. One of the things they pointed out is if you go to any tourist map of a city, look for where the legend is put, right? This box of where things are. And it will usually cover up the places that they're not so interested in, right? And there's not enough information in that. And the other thing that bothered them was they had all of these, and I'm guilty of it, design students and engineering students coming to their communities to look at what was going on and then come up with proposals and then extract it and never come back and tell them about it. Right? So it's like, what was the benefit to us? They had a process, one of their key processes. They had two pillars, savings and what they called mapping, right? Or enumeration was the term, enumeration, which basically they go into the settlements, their settlements, and say, who lives here? How long have you been here? And they map it themselves. So they had enough of this kind of poverty tourism coming in there, extracting data. So they built their own data platform so that they could see it. And they could understand what was going on. And that if people are going to come give us data, it was like, well, it's already there. Go get it. Right? Okay, a few more stories. This is small farmers in Bangalore and geoanalytics. The World Bank created a program called Bhumi, and it was to digitalize the cadastral, these are the land maps or property maps in India, but they started first with the state of Karnataka, which is where Bangalore is. And the idea was we were going to eliminate corruption because we will have the clear digital record of where things are. And it was open data. And it completely ignored the current setup of farmer tenants. I think the number I remember is there were like 190 definitions in the local language of a tenant-farmer relationship. And they collapsed that to 4, which if you are the tenant or the farmer landowner, right, it's like, what's our relationship now? The other was, this was all in data, but in order to correct the data, you would have to go to the town, which had a kiosk, and that's where you would apply for it. And usually that would take a day or 2 days' time. So they probably collected the minor corruption that was going on, and it was open data, so it was great. But guess who had access to all of that data too? Property developers in New Jersey, who could then aggregate properties and negotiate knowing the whole picture, while the local landowners were like, I don't know. Right? So access to data may be equal, you all have the same access, but access to compute is a very, very different thing. Right? So that's why Bangalore has all of these IT campuses on them, big name IT campuses. Okay, this is one of my last stories. That visual is a map of part of LA with Sherman Oaks. Sherman Oaks is one of the tonier, richer areas of LA. LA then said, oh, we're gonna get all of this mobility data, which is important. And one of the things they promised was, we can geofence, right? So if there's a concert here or anything going on, we'll geofence it so people can't go in. It automatically knows the system, which sounds practical, right? Guess one of the first uses there was of geofencing. Sherman Oaks didn't like people riding bikes, shared bikes in there. So they pressured the government to put a geofence around Sherman Oaks. Right? And it wasn't because of any public need, it was because they had the power to do this, right? So there is a power imbalance there. So, last few points. This is from Susan Lee Starr. The world is not binary, and the thing with data and computing in our binary computing is it forces you into binary decisions, right? Her classic example in information, the ethnography of information, was they were looking at forms to fill out for census. Well, this was a local census. But for women, there was a whole set of definitions of married, single, unmarried, right? Spouse's name, which was like the woman was getting defined by her relationship to men, but there was no recourse to it. I have an Ñ in my Spanish N in my last name, and my current, my forever microaggression is you go to a system and you put in my last name, De La Peña, and they say, no, it won't go in, right? Because it's using an ASCII set that doesn't include the Spanish Ñ. And even in, I always get problems when I'm traveling internationally because the airlines, their old system, which is still in use, doesn't allow for spaces in the last name. So I'm trying to log in, but my passport spelling last name isn't the same as what's on the booking, right? And that's because there were biases in the system that were coded in. All right. This is my last. It's a quote, right? So let me see if I covered everything here. Yeah, one more thing. A point to make, right? It was funny because in the early 10s, the narrative around data was, when big data was in, was, it's the data exhaust that's important. And data is the new oil, which if you think about how toxic that is now, right, it's interesting. But this is, again, my Gen X, and I think I'm a little more exact on this one rather than the first one, is from a song called IGY by Steely Dan. And one of the verses says, a just machine to make big decisions, programmed by fellows with compassion and vision, will be clean when their work is done, will be eternally free, yes, and eternally young. Right? It's this promise of technology. And of course, you have to ask, who are these fellows with compassion and vision? Who gave them, and by what standards was that compassion and vision? Okay, wrap back up, and let's have a discussion. As you deal with open data, think about power. and power relationships, and who gets access to the data, and who holds power, or are you shifting power? Are you hiding it? Tell stories to change systems. Data does not really change. I mean, it's important that we know it, but the most important thing to do is tell stories. And lastly, it's all about relationships, not just the equations and the correlations. Okay. Email me if you have any other questions. So I said, let's do Q&A and just have people ask questions, or that we have a conversation on that. How's that sound? Thank you. I used to teach high school, and we used to say, if no one asked questions, either it was very clear or no one got a thing.
Thanks for the content, and especially the reading list. I love, and anti-fragility was up there yesterday. I'm getting some great reading list ideas here, so thanks for including that. I'm Ted Sweeney. I'm with King County Metro. Curious, I love also that you boiled things down to one message, and I'm curious, I think this room, I don't want to mischaracterize this room, but I think we're a lot of public, of academia, of public sector. I don't know if we have a ton of private sector. We have some. But when I think about data and power, I think about big private interests. Is that message the same if you're speaking to a room of the big players in big data, all right, who maybe have a lot of this data that we want and maybe don't have different incentives for how it's used? I'm just curious if it's the same single message or if there's a different message for that audience.
I think it's, well, depends on what kind of private they are, right? So if it's a large company like Palantir or name your new AI company, then they're probably not too receptive to the idea of power, right? And to be honest, I've never been invited to any of those big conversations. I don't think I would be interested, right? So I might tone down that optimism a bit if I was invited, but no, they need to hear it, right? They need to hear it. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just think, power has some zero-sum qualities, right? And if there's an association with data and power, and we have organizations that are doing a really, really incredible job getting data, really a world historical new, success in gathering data, what's our message to them, especially from the public sector regulatory space? Yeah. What is our message to have partnership across that gulf? Because again, if data is power, they have a great deal of data and are way ahead in that race.
The UK technology movement in the 20s, there was a group called, I'm going to blank out on the name of the group, but they had a line called Just Enough Internet. Right? And the idea is you should just have just enough internet. And I think the new term is just enough AI, rather than, it'll solve all of these things. So the idea is don't grab more than what you actually need. And the example, for instance, in SDOT is, we can have a power conversation of give us all of your route data, individual routes, right? But for us, it's like, so what are you going to do with that? Right? And what kind of problems might be created if you have that available? So.
Thanks.
I think these backgrounds are just enough AI.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, Benjie.
Yes, it is. That is by AI.
Hey, Benjie. Thanks for the presentation. I love everything you've put up there. Big Susan Lay Star fan myself. Wanted to ask you, I feel like our political discourse now, there is obviously an assault on truth and fact. We've got a polarization of, your bias is A, my bias is B. I guess, I'm trying to form the question here, but if you kind of grant that, truth is this dialectic and there's this dialogue between these two sides, we have a perspective too, power has a perspective, how can we be self-aware of our own framing and document our assumptions or the context behind or in which data was collected to try to be self-aware of our own framing and power so that we can kind of, in a more in a more defensible, honest way, say we're aware of our own biases and we're trying to kind of reach that truth versus just trying to what the kind of opposition would say, what power would say, trying to snowball them with our perspective that is equally as biased, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that you should do with any kind of data exercise as you're gathering data is do a power map before you even gather the data, right? Who are the stakeholders? What are their interests? Who might be interested in this? You cannot solve for everything, but maybe it'll get you to just enough data, right? And kind of reducing it to what it is that you really need that's driven by what you're actually trying to solve rather than, because we can gather it, we'll gather it, right? So I think that's one main point. The other, thanks for bringing it up, is, you know, it's a really, really weird time. There's a group of futurists, futurism scholars who gathered in Singapore last year. They came up with a report of what was happening in the world, right? And I strongly recommend it. It's called 10F, 10 Scenarios for the Future. It's available on the net. And one of the things they had predicted, so scenarios, as you know, are stories that you tell of the future. They're not, it's not that that's what's going to happen, but it kind of shows what the driving forces are and how they're interacting. And they actually talked about the same thing that Mark Carney talked about, which was the old power structure has been, it's not just a disruption, it's a rupture, right? And I think the things that we assume now of how the internet behaves and what data we get and kind of the flow of these things is going to come in real question, right? One of the other things they say there is it's going to go from think global, act local to think local, connect local. Right? So I think part of what you have to think about is the community you're in and what their needs are. I think the idea of a universality that tends to happen in technology, right, because you kind of abstracted it down, probably hasn't served us very well. And so think local and what really the needs are in the community you're trying to serve.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. It's really helpful. I have a question about like whether or not you have different strategies that have worked in order to shift the power dynamic from like benefiting private interest to putting the power back and the data access back to the community and people who are underrepresented.
Best practices, right? So then we can formulate it. I think one of them is to map the power, but also map what you don't know. And whether you need to know anything about this. Another resource I'll tell you, Von Tan writes a newsletter called Uncertainty, but he talks about how do you decide and how do you manage in uncertainty, which he also makes the point that that's where AI and computing fails, when things are uncertain. Right? So map not only what it is that you're trying to find out, what's around it, or at least take note of it. Again, knowing you won't be able to solve these things, but as you're aware of it, it's like, if you are from I'm male, I'm highly educated, I have to understand my privileges. And so when I enter into any conversation, I should be aware of those privileges. That doesn't mean that I will automatically solve for them, but being aware of them is a step forward. So not a clear answer, maybe, because again, it's not linear, it's more system dynamic. But, all right. Are we good? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So, join me in thanking Benjie for that provocation.